The familiar scent of success, leather, glass, and ambition, filled the air as Melissa Chen stepped into the gleaming headquarters of Hamilton Enterprises. 20 years ago, she and Linda Hamilton had shared secrets behind the bleachers at Roosevelt High. Now, Linda sat atop a family empire worth billions, while Melissa chased stories that could make or break careers. "Ms. Hamilton will see you now," the executive assistant announced, her voice carrying the practiced neutrality of someone who'd witnessed countless power plays in these halls. Melissa adjusted her blazer, feeling the reassuring weight of her recorder in her pocket. The story was supposed to be simple, a puff piece about female leadership in family businesses. The kind of article that usually made her want to quit journalism altogether. But something in Linda's voice during their preliminary call had sparked her investigative instincts. Linda stood as Melissa entered, and for a moment, they were teenage girls again. Same honey blonde hair, though now expertly styled. Same confident smile, though now it carried the weight of responsibilities Melissa could barely imagine. "God, look at you," Linda laughed, embracing her old friend. "Still wearing those power suits like you're going to save the world. Still wearing those Louboutins like you own it," Melissa countered, returning the hug while noting how Linda's fingers trembled slightly against her back. They settled into the corner of Linda's office, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The recorder between them felt like a loaded gun. "So, tell me about carrying on the Hamilton legacy," Melissa began, watching Linda's face carefully. "Your father built this company from nothing." A shadow crossed Linda's features, quick as a summer storm. "Dad had vision. He knew what he wanted and wouldn't let anything stand in his way." She paused, fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. "There were some dark times, of course. Every family business has them." Melissa's journalistic radar pinged. "Dark times? Nothing worth dwelling on," Linda said quickly. "Too quickly. Ancient history. Let's focus on where we are now. Did you know we're expanding into sustainable energy? The board just approved a $2 billion initiative." But Melissa barely heard the carefully rehearsed corporate speak that followed. She was watching Linda's hands, which hadn't stopped moving since the interview began. Watching how her old friend's eyes kept darting to the heavy wooden doors of her office, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "You know what I remember most about high school?" Melissa interrupted suddenly. "How you used to come to school some days with these elaborate stories about where your dad was. Business trips to Dubai, meetings in Tokyo. But he was always back for the important things, wasn't he? Like that time the police came to question you about the company's finances." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Linda's smile remained fixed, but her eyes had gone hard as diamonds. "That's not what this article is about, Mel." "What is it about, Linda?" "Because I'm sitting here with my oldest friend, and she's terrified of something. Or someone." Linda stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt with hands that had finally stopped shaking. "I think we're done for today. My assistant will send you our press package. It has all the information you need for your article." "Linda. Don't." The word cut like a blade. "Some doors shouldn't be opened, Mel. Some stories shouldn't be told. For both our sakes, write the fluff piece. Please." As security escorted her out, Melissa felt the weight of more than just her recorder in her pocket. She carried the certainty that behind Linda Hamilton's perfect corporate facade lay a story that could shake Manhattan's financial district to its foundations. And she had never been very good at leaving doors closed. That night, as she sat in her small home office, Melissa's cursor blinked accusingly on a blank document. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "I meant what I said. Let it go. Please. For old time's sake." Melissa stared at the message for a long moment before opening her browser. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing, "Hamilton Enterprises Fraud Investigation 2003. The search results would change everything. The archived newspaper article flickered on Melissa's screen like an accusation. Hamilton Enterprises under federal investigation. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed, too engrossed in piecing together a puzzle 2 decades in the making. Richard Hamilton, Linda's father, had been accused of orchestrating a massive securities fraud scheme. The evidence had seemed overwhelming: falsified documents, phantom investors, millions in missing funds. Then, inexplicably, the case had vanished. Key witnesses recanted. Documents disappeared. The lead investigator suddenly retired to a villa in Spain. But it was the photo accompanying the article that made Melissa's breath catch. 17-year-old Linda, standing behind her father at a press conference. The image was grainy, but Melissa recognized the look in her friend's eyes. She'd seen it just yesterday, the same haunted vigilance, the same carefully constructed facade hiding something that felt like terror. Her phone buzzed. Josh Parker, her colleague at the magazine. "Tell me you're not still at the office," he said when she answered. "I'm home." Melissa rubbed her eyes. "Josh, I need your help with something. Off the record. Those are my favorite kinds of something." She could hear him settling in, the familiar creak of his ancient office chair. "What are we looking at?" Hamilton Enterprises, 2003. The fraud case that wasn't. A low whistle. "That's ancient history, Mel. And dangerous territory. Richard Hamilton has friends in very dark places." "I know. But Josh." Melissa pulled up another article, this one more recent. "Look at their expansion plans. $2 billion in sustainable energy projects. The numbers don't add up. They're moving too fast, leveraging too much. You think they're running the same playbook? I think it's worse. I think they never stopped." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Josh spoke, his voice gentle. "Mel, I know Linda was your friend, but—" "Is my friend," she corrected sharply. Then, softer, "You should have seen her yesterday, Josh. She's trapped in something. I can feel it. Or she's complicit." The words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Melissa closed her eyes, remembering countless sleepovers, shared secrets, dreams whispered in the dark. Linda had been there when Melissa's mother died, holding her through nights of grief. How many times had Linda sought refuge at Melissa's house when things got intense at home? Her computer pinged. An email from an anonymous account, Hamilton Enterprises 2003. Inside was a single document, an internal memo dated just weeks before the investigation collapsed. It detailed wire transfers to offshore accounts, each linked to family members of key witnesses and investigators. "My father made the darkness look like light." The words hit Melissa like a physical blow. She remembered Linda saying them at graduation, pride shining in her eyes as she quoted the man who had built an empire on broken lives. They'd all thought it was about his business acumen, his ability to see opportunity where others saw chaos. Now the words carried a different weight. Her phone lit up with a text from Linda, "I saw you accessed our company records. Stop digging, Mel. Please. Some people can't be saved." Melissa's fingers shook as she typed her reply, "Maybe. But I have to try. For the girl who used to dream about changing the world, not owning it." The response came almost instantly, "That girl died a long time ago. Don't make me bury you too." Melissa stared at the words until they blurred. Then she opened a new document and began to type. "The story of Hamilton Enterprises isn't just about money. It's about power, and the price we pay to keep it. It's about the lies we tell ourselves, and the truths we bury so deep they poison the groundwater of our souls." Her doorbell rang, sharp and sudden in the quiet night. Through the peephole, she saw Linda, still in her office clothes, mascara streaked down her cheeks. "You want the truth?" Linda's voice was raw. Let me show you what it costs. As Melissa opened the door, she knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next would change them both forever. Some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. And sometimes, that was exactly what salvation required. Linda's hands trembled as she poured the scotch, amber liquid catching the city lights that streamed through Melissa's apartment windows. The expensive blazer she'd worn like armor all day lay discarded on the couch, leaving her looking somehow younger, more vulnerable in her silk blouse. "I was 16 the first time I realized what he really was," Linda began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I found documents in his study, proof that he'd bankrupted 3 families who trusted him with their life savings. When he caught me, he didn't rage or threaten. He just smiled." Melissa sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might break this moment of raw truth. "He sat me down and explained how the world really works," Linda continued, staring into her untouched drink. "How power isn't taken, it's cultivated. How trust is the most valuable currency, and betrayal its highest form of exchange. Then he gave me a choice: I could be his daughter, or I could be his enemy." "You were just a kid, Linda." "Was I?" Linda's laugh held no humor. "Because I made my choice that day. I helped him destroy evidence. I learned to smile at people who trusted us, knowing we were bleeding them dry. I became exactly what he wanted, his perfect heir, his shield against suspicion. Who would believe the corrupt businessman narrative when his daughter was so accomplished, so charitable, so pristine?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 2 decades of unspoken pain. Melissa thought about all the times Linda had hosted charity galas, had been featured in magazines as a role model for young women in business. The perfect facade hiding a prison of complicity. "The 2003 investigation," Melissa ventured carefully. "You tried to help them, didn't you?" Linda's fingers tightened around her glass. "I gave them everything. Documents, recordings, account numbers. I really thought it would end there. That justice would win." She took a shuddering breath. 3 days later, the lead investigator's daughter was in a car accident. Nothing fatal, just a warning. Next was the prosecutor's wife, pictures of her with a man who wasn't her husband. Then the key witness's son suddenly lost his scholarship to Yale. Jesus, Linda. He never touched them directly. Never left a trace. Just showed me, one by one, how thoroughly he could destroy anyone who stood against him. And when it was over, he took me to dinner and told me how proud he was of my loyalty." Linda's voice cracked. "Do you know what it's like to hate someone so much you can barely breathe, but still crave their approval? To know you're becoming the very thing that terrifies you?" Melissa moved then, crossing the room to sit beside her oldest friend. The distance between their teenage dreams and this moment felt infinite. "The New Energy Initiative," Linda continued, wiping tears with angry precision. "It's happening again. Bigger this time. Green energy is the perfect cover: complex regulations, massive government subsidies, environmental impact studies that can be manipulated. He's going to destroy thousands of lives, and I've helped build the machine that will do it." "Then help me stop him," Melissa said quietly. "For real this time." Linda turned to her, eyes bright with fear and something else, something that looked almost like hope. "He'll destroy you. Maybe. Or maybe it's time someone showed him that not everything in this world can be bought or broken." Melissa took Linda's hands in hers. "You're not 16 anymore. And you're not alone." For a long moment, Linda was silent. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small USB drive. "Everything's here. Account numbers, shell companies, emails, 20 years of corruption mapped out in perfect detail. I've been collecting it, piece by piece, like building my own funeral pyre." "Or your liberation," Melissa countered softly. "You don't understand. If this gets out, I'm complicit in everything. I'll lose everything, the company, my reputation, probably my freedom. But you'll gain yourself back. Dawn was breaking over the city when Linda finally stood to leave. At the door, she turned back. When the story breaks, he'll know it was me. No matter how you write it, he'll know. Then maybe it's time he learned what real power looks like, Melissa replied. The kind that comes from choosing truth over terror, no matter the cost. As the door closed behind Linda, Melissa looked at the USB drive in her hand. Within its circuits lay the power to topple an empire, expose decades of corruption, and either save or destroy her best friend. The real question was, which would do which? The data on the USB drive told a story that had been decades in the making, written in the language of wire transfers and shell companies, but its true narrative was etched in broken trust and shattered lives. As Melissa sifted through the documents in her office, each spreadsheet and email thread revealed not just financial fraud, but the systematic destruction of a daughter's soul. Josh leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his graying hair. It's worse than we thought. The environmental impact studies for the new energy initiative? All fabricated. They're planning to build on protected wetlands, using shell companies to hide the ownership trail. If this goes through, entire ecosystems destroyed, communities poisoned, Melissa finished, her voice tight. And that's just the beginning. But it was the personal correspondence that truly chilled her. Emails from Richard Hamilton to his daughter, each one a masterclass in manipulation. Praise wrapped in threats, love twisted into a weapon. Congratulations on the Wilson deal, princess. Your presentation was flawless. Reminded me of how proud I was when you helped handle that unfortunate situation in '03. Always knew you had it in you. The board was impressed by your leadership today. Such a relief to have a daughter who understands family loyalty. Unlike poor James Miller's son, heard he's still struggling after that unfortunate drug scandal. Amazing how quickly reputation can crumble. Each message was a reminder of the chains that bound Linda to her father's empire. But between the lines, Melissa could see something else, a daughter's desperate attempts to protect others from her father's reach. Projects mysteriously delayed until vulnerable investors could quietly withdraw. Warning signs subtly placed in financial reports for those who knew where to look. Small acts of rebellion wrapped in perfect compliance. Her phone buzzed, a text from Linda, Dad knows something's wrong. He's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. I can't face him again. Melissa's finger hovered over the call button when her office door opened. Richard Hamilton stood there, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. Two men in dark suits flanked him, their presence a quiet threat. Ms. Chen, he smiled, and Melissa finally understood what Linda meant about darkness wearing light. I believe we need to discuss your recent interest in my family's business. Mr. Hamilton. Melissa's voice remained steady as she subtly pressed record on her phone. I wasn't aware I warranted a personal visit. Oh, you've earned it. He settled into the chair across from her desk with the easy confidence of a man used to owning every room he entered. My daughter speaks very highly of you. In fact, she's shared quite a lot about your investigation. Melissa's heart stopped. Linda came to me this morning, very distressed. His smile never wavered. Showed me all the evidence she'd gathered of your attempts to manipulate her. Using your childhood friendship to extract confidential information. Threatening to expose her past struggles with anxiety if she didn't cooperate. Very thorough documentation. That's not the truth. He laughed softly. Truth is such a malleable thing, isn't it? Rather like memory. Or loyalty. He placed a thick folder on her desk. Your brother's construction company, struggling, isn't it? Would be a shame if those pending contracts fell through. And your mother's medical bills, such a burden for a journalist's salary. Each word was a carefully placed blade, showing her exactly how much he knew, how vulnerable everyone she loved could be. This was what Linda had lived with her entire life, the weight of protecting others from a man who viewed love as leverage. "You're trying to destroy your own daughter," Melissa said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes, not conscience, but irritation at being challenged. "I made my daughter into a queen. Everything she is, she owes to me." "No." Melissa stood, anger burning through her fear. "Everything she is, she became in spite of you. Every person she secretly helped, every life she tried to protect, that was her choice. Her strength." Strength? He stood as well, mask slipping to reveal the predator beneath. "Let me show you what strength really is. You have 24 hours to kill this story and resign. After that." He shrugged elegantly. "Well, I've always believed that tragedy brings communities together. Your old neighborhood could use that kind of unity." After he left, Melissa sat in the growing darkness of her office, mind racing. Her phone lit up with a message from an unknown number, Storage Unit 247, Central Storage. Code 1003. "Hurry. L." She grabbed her keys, heart pounding. Linda had made her choice, and now Melissa had to make hers. The question wasn't whether to expose the truth anymore. It was how to do it without letting Richard Hamilton destroy everyone she loved in the process. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest act of courage wasn't in fighting the monster. It was in showing others they didn't have to face it alone. Storage Unit 247 held more than just papers. It held 20 years of quiet resistance, carefully documented evidence of a daughter's silent war against her father's empire of corruption. Linda had been building this archive since she was 16, every fraudulent deal, every threatened witness, every act of manipulation meticulously recorded and preserved. "I started keeping records the day after he caught me in his study," Linda explained, her voice steady despite the tremors in her hands as she sorted through the boxes. "Not to expose him, not at first. I just needed proof that I wasn't crazy, that the things he did were real." Melissa watched her friend move through the space with practiced familiarity, realizing that this storage unit had been Linda's sanctuary, the one place where truth didn't have to wear a mask. "Each time he used me to gain someone's trust, I documented it. Every time he praised me for being the perfect daughter while threatening to destroy someone I tried to warn." Linda's voice caught. "I kept it all. Like collecting pieces of myself he couldn't corrupt." The evidence was overwhelming, not just of financial crimes, but of a systematic pattern of psychological warfare waged against anyone who threatened Richard Hamilton's control. Employee files revealed a pattern of strategic promotions and demotions based not on merit, but on potential leverage. Charity initiatives carefully designed to create dependencies that could be exploited. "He doesn't just break people," Linda said softly. "He makes them break themselves." But mixed among the damning documents were other records, small acts of defiance Linda had managed over the years. Anonymous warnings sent to potential victims. Strategic mistakes in paperwork that gave people time to protect themselves. A network of quiet allies she'd built within the company, others who saw the truth but felt powerless to act. All this time, Melissa breathed, "You were building a resistance." "I was surviving," Linda corrected, but there was something different in her voice now, a quiet strength replacing the fear. "But maybe that's not enough anymore." They worked through the night, piecing together a narrative that went beyond simple corporate fraud. This was a story about power and control, about the quiet courage of those who resist not with dramatic gestures, but with patient, persistent truth-telling. "We can't just expose the crimes," Melissa realized as dawn approached. "We need to expose the system itself, how he identifies vulnerabilities, creates dependencies, turns victims into unwilling accomplices." Linda nodded, her eyes clear for the first time since this began. Show others they're not alone. That what happened to them wasn't their fault. The plan came together piece by piece. Not just an exposé, but a roadmap for others trapped in similar webs of control and corruption. They would release the evidence in stages, first the financial crimes, then the pattern of threats and manipulation, finally the full scope of the system Richard Hamilton had built. "He'll still try to destroy us," Linda said, but the words held more resignation than fear now. "Probably," Melissa agreed. "But this time, you're not facing him alone." They were interrupted by a call from Josh. "Mel, you need to see this. Hamilton's calling a press conference. He's announcing Linda's temporary leave of absence due to mental health concerns. He's setting up a sympathy narrative, the stressed executive daughter, the concerned father." Linda's laugh held no humor. "Right on schedule. Next comes the leaked evidence of my instability, the suggested substance abuse problems." "No," Melissa said firmly. "Next comes the truth. All of it." She pulled out her laptop and began to write. "This is a story about power. Not the kind that comes from wealth or position, but the kind that grows in darkness, feeding on silence and shame. It's a story about a father who built an empire on broken trust, and a daughter who spent 20 years gathering the pieces. But mostly, it's a story about the quiet courage of those who choose truth over safety, healing over power. My name is Melissa Chen, and my best friend is the whistleblower who's about to bring down one of the largest corporate fraud schemes in history. But before you hear about the billions in stolen money or the environmental crimes or the shattered lives, you need to understand what real strength looks like. It looks like a 16-year-old girl starting a secret archive of her father's crimes, not knowing if she'd ever be brave enough to use it. It looks like a woman spending 20 years appearing to be the perfect heir while secretly building a network of protection for others trapped in her father's web. It looks like choosing to lose everything you've been taught to value, in order to reclaim everything you truly are." Linda read the words over her shoulder, tears falling freely now. "He always said I was just like him. That darkness was in my blood." "No," Melissa said softly. "You were the light they couldn't extinguish. And it's time everyone knew it." As the sun rose over the city, they began the work of turning 20 years of quiet resistance into a revolution of truth. The darkness had held power for so long because it convinced each victim they were alone. That ended today. The morning of the Hamilton Enterprises press conference dawned clear and cold, the kind of autumn day that makes Manhattan's glass towers look like they're made of light. Melissa stood in the crowd of reporters, watching Richard Hamilton take the podium with his trademark paternal smile. The expression that had once charmed boardrooms and crushed resistance now seemed hollow, like a mask worn too long. "It is with deep concern that I must address certain allegations," he began, his voice carrying the perfect note of wounded dignity. "My daughter Linda has been struggling with personal issues that have affected her judgment. As her father, I tell them about Sarah Jenkins, Dad." Linda's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. She stood at the back of the room, no longer wearing the designer armor of a corporate executive. In simple black slacks and a white blouse, she looked both younger and somehow stronger. Richard's smile flickered but held. "Linda, sweetheart, this isn't the time. Sarah Jenkins was our chief compliance officer in 2015, Linda continued, walking slowly toward the podium. She came to you with concerns about illegal dumping at our Texas facilities. You praised her integrity, promoted her, made her feel valued. Then you discovered her sister's gambling addiction, arranged for her to win big at a casino you secretly owned, and used that manufactured debt to force Sarah to falsify environmental reports. The room had gone completely silent. She killed herself 3 months later. I have her letters. All of them. Including the ones where she described exactly how you broke her." Richard's mask slipped, just for a moment, but the cameras caught it. The predators snarled beneath the patriarch's concern. "You were always so proud of how well I learned your lessons about power," Linda said softly. "About how to identify people's weaknesses, their pressure points. What you never realized was that while you were teaching me to hunt, I was learning to gather evidence. She nodded to Melissa, who began distributing USB drives to every major news outlet present. 20 years of documented corruption, threats, and manipulation. Not just the financial crimes or the environmental violations, but the human cost. Every person you destroyed, every life you poisoned. All of it preserved by the daughter you taught to keep such meticulous records. You ungrateful, Richard caught himself, but it was too late. The mask had cracked. I was grateful. Linda's voice held no anger now, only a deep, settled certainty. Grateful for every lesson about power and control, because they showed me exactly what I was fighting. Grateful for every time you made me complicit, because it taught me how to document everything. Even grateful for the fear, because it helped me recognize it in others and find ways to help them. She turned to address the room directly. My father built his empire by convincing each of his victims that they were alone. That their weakness or greed or desperation was unique. But we weren't alone. And neither is anyone else trapped in systems of abuse and control. The evidence was already spreading across social media. Emails, recordings, financial records, but more importantly, stories. Stories of resistance and survival, of small acts of defiance in the face of overwhelming power. The narrative wasn't just about corporate corruption anymore. It was about breaking the cycles of abuse that perpetuate across generations. You think this makes you strong? Richard's voice had lost its polish, revealing the raw fury beneath. I made you. Everything you are. No, Dad. Linda's voice was gentle now, almost pitying. Everything I am is what survived you. Everything I achieved was in spite of you. And everything I'm doing now. That's about making sure your kind of power can't hide in the shadows anymore. As security led Richard Hamilton away, still sputtering threats and recriminations, Linda turned to find Melissa. They embraced in front of the flashing cameras, no longer a powerful executive and a journalist, but simply two women who had chosen truth over fear, healing over power. Later, in the quiet of Melissa's apartment, they watched the story explode across every major news network. Federal investigations were already being announced. Class action lawsuits were being filed. But more importantly, people were coming forward with their own stories of corporate abuse and coercive control. It's like watching a dam break, Melissa observed, scrolling through the flood of responses to her article. Linda nodded, a complex mix of emotions playing across her face. All those years, I thought I was just surviving. Just trying to minimize the damage he could do. I never imagined that your survival could help others find their own way out. That healing could be contagious. Linda smiled, and for the first time since they were teenagers, it reached her eyes. What happens now? Melissa looked at her friend, not the perfect corporate heir or the wounded daughter, but the woman who had spent 20 years gathering evidence of her own truth, piece by quiet piece. Now, we keep telling the story. Not just about the darkness, but about how to find light within it. About how sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to let fear have the last word. Linda leaned back, watching the sun set over the city she had once helped rule. You know what's strange? I finally feel like my father's daughter. Not because I learned his lessons about power, but because I found the strength to choose a different kind of legacy. Melissa raised her glass. To new legacies, then. And to the quiet warriors who build them, one truth at a time. As night fell over Manhattan, their story was already spreading, touching lives they would never know, inspiring courage they would never witness. In boardrooms and bedrooms across the city, people who had felt trapped in their own webs of power and control were beginning to see something new. The first light of dawn, breaking through the darkness they had thought would last forever.